Hi, my name is Joy, and I am an aspiring computer scientist in my second year at St. Louis University. And today, I'm your host for this podcast. Welcome to Quality of Life. In today's episode, we're going to be exploring the city of St. Louis. I'm from a small city in Illinois, but being close to St. Louis has exposed me to media portrayal that this city is only dangerous and full of crime. Although these issues are prevalent in the city, a report from the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department shows that the homicide rate has been at its lowest in the past 5 years. Today, we are here to talk about some of the other prevalent social issues that affect city residents every day. But before we get there, I want to highlight some of the census data here. According to census data for St. Louis, from 2010 to 2020, the black population saw a 17% decrease, while the white population only saw a 6% decrease. That's an alarming rate, and to be honest, I had no clue it was happening until I started my research for my English project. Today, I will be discussing some elements of how the quality of life in St. Louis City is causing people to flee. So, why did I choose to talk about the quality of life in St. Louis? I think that in my first year here, I did a lot of visual learning about St. Louis. And the way I saw these visual differences was from me just driving off campus in any direction. And I feel that when you see visual differences, that tells you that something else is going on. And I want to be aware of those issues that residents may be facing, as well as to be able to understand how and what the city is going to do to help those residents that are facing those problems. We have a guest on the podcast, Dr. Barton, who is a navigator in the Billiken First Chapter program. She is also a former English professor, and she shared some of her experiences in St. Louis while we were exploring topics for my paper. I'm glad that she is joining me today to continue our conversation.
Hi, Joy. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. Um, just to say a little bit more about myself, I used to be English faculty here at St. Louis University. I have a PhD in English and Women and Gender Studies. And I moved to St. Louis about 22 years ago when I was an undergrad. And I have lived in several different neighborhoods in the St. Louis region in that time. I've lived in South City, South County, and North County. And in 2014, I moved into Veneta Park, which is where I live now. And Veneta Park, which not a lot of people are familiar with, it's a city in the county, and it's situated right in between University City and Overland. So it's in the Normandy School District, but I can walk very comfortably in like less than 10 minutes to either the Overland City line or the University City line.
Okay. That's a new neighborhood I haven't heard
Mm-hmm.
about yet. I feel like I need to do more research about St. Louis. You talked about how you got here. How did you get to SLU? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's actually it's really funny that you ask. And so I decided to come here, and at the time I just thought, oh, I'll get a master's and then I'll decide whether or not I want a PhD. And I really loved doing research, and like my second year as a master's student, I got to finally teach in a classroom, and I love teaching, and so I decided to just stick with it and did my PhD. And because I decided to have two kids, my PhD took me longer than I thought it was going to take. But um, so that's how I ended up at SLU, was as a graduate student. And then when I rolled off of funding as a graduate student, I started as adjunct faculty. And then I had the opportunity to apply for a position when Billiken's First Chapter was started, and um, having a stable job, because adjunct faculty is not very stable employment, where I got to work directly with students and support students, was very exciting. So that's my SLU journey.
Shout out to SLU's English department for your employment and for getting you to join the Billiken First Chapter program. The Billiken First Chapter program is where I met Dr. Barton, and she listens to all my rants all the time. So I know she cares about the students and making connections with them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So since we're talking about SLU, there's this term that a lot of people may encounter. I encountered it in my first year, but some people learn it later on. It's called the SLU bubble.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of this term before?
So I don't actually think I heard that specific term until you and I were talking about it, but I'd heard of the idea, right, that students come to SLU and they like don't go off campus, or they're told not to go to the neighborhoods around campus, and yeah, that was pretty much my encounter with the SLU bubble, and also I think maybe some conversations about how SLU interacts with the neighborhood, like as an institution interacts with the neighborhoods around campus too. But mostly, especially for students living on campus, how did they interact with the community around them too?
Thank you for sharing that, first of all. I would say that when I heard the SLU bubble, we were actually talking about it in one of our courses. We talked about it in one of the new core courses, Cure Personalis, and then our Ignite seminar, which we were exploring the city of St. Louis. And we were also exploring like the history of SLU. You can't talk about SLU without talking about like St. Louis.
Yep.
And there are a couple like factors into it, like the location of SLU. It's in Midtown, but it's also in like I guess people would call it an urban setting or whatever. So some students, when they come here, they're probably not used to being in that type of setting. Not being used to that setting and then suddenly being pushed into it as a college student.
Yep.
Not only are you trying to navigate your campus, but you're trying to navigate the city. And that's where those ideas kind of come about. But I think SLU bubble is a term that's definitely explored among the faculty and the students over here.
Definitely.
I guess my next question would be, what do you think about the demographic shifts in the city? I know we kind of talked about the census data about how like the city of St. Louis already peaked like during their industrial period, and like now the population is like steady decreasing. And then going back to like the topic of my paper, like there's such a significant decrease among like the Black population. I just wanted to know, what do you think about the demographic shift, or like why that's happening or stuff like that?
Ooh, so I can talk about sort of what I've observed while living here. I don't know how accurate my like assessment of anything is going to be, but like one of the things that I've seen is I've seen a lot of efforts, both grassroots and from the local government, like efforts to attract people to the city, and whether that's development or neighborhood revitalization, there's so many barriers because it's so complex. I'm going to shift and I'm going to talk about education, but I swear it's part of like noticing this demographic shift. So one of the things that really threw me off when I moved to St. Louis was the where did you go to high school question. People don't ask that where I grew up. I mean, it might come up in conversation, but at first I was like, well, that's a quirky St. Louis thing. And then the longer I lived here, the more I realized that people were feeling out a lot of things about your class background based on that question, right? So where did you go to high school? Oh, I went to DeSmut, or I went to Rosati Kane, or, I went to SLPS. Like those types of answers suddenly told people a lot about like where you grew up and like whether or not your parents were able to afford private tuition. And I just thought it was weird. I just thought that St. Louis was a weird Catholic town because I didn't grow up with a lot of like Catholics in the area where I was, and a lot of people liked to go to Catholic schools. And then I started learning more about private and public education here in St. Louis. And so I've been really watching a lot of the choices made when it comes to the different public school districts in the area. Of course, I'm a mom now, and I live in the Normandy School District. So I'm watching a lot of those decisions about accreditation and resources and funding like a hawk. And I know that a lot of people of all races that I've talked to are very concerned about access, like equitable access to education. And there's only so much that you can do to attract and get people to stay in an area if the schools aren't there. But I mean, there's also a lot of other stuff that was touched on in your paper that I've seen going on. So I think that it's this really frustrating problem to not only watch but also to be a part of, to see people wanting to make an area thrive and then like not being able to figure out what to do to fix it. And I also see that in the neighborhood that I'm in, because we're also right next to Pagedale, and there's a lot of economic revitalization efforts there. But I can talk about that a little later.
I think that it's very interesting that you brought up like the topic of like education because I've been asked that too, and I'm like, I'm not from St. Louis. I live in Illinois, but that is a question. Like, no matter what type of event, oh, we're at a party. Oh, what high school did you go to? You're in class. Oh, it's the same question. Or even at networking events, like there's this guy. He's like, I gotta ask. I was like, I already know what he's gonna ask. Like, it's so crazy. Like, it's like that like saying where you went to high school is like suddenly judging like your where you are on like an economic scale, and I think that's terrible. But I see that it's a very popular choice for St. Louis people to
Yes,
make.
it is.
Yeah. So with that being said about like the different economic differences among the city, talk about like the separations in the neighborhood because you know it's distinct, very distinct between North City, North County, and then South City and South County, and then like in the middle on that Delmar Divide.
Yep.
And for people that are listening, if you've never heard of the Delmar Divide, it is there's a street in St. Louis named Delmar Boulevard, and to the north side there is it's more of a visual thing, but on the north side you can see that there's more black residents in that area and the income is lower, and then it's the complete opposite on the other side. And not only do the numbers show it, but like the visual of it, like you can see on one side how the houses look and how the buildings look, or lack of houses and businesses, and then on the other side like very upscale houses, very like more attractive like neighborhoods, stuff like that. So what do you think about the division among the city? Because I think you said you're from like a smaller city. Like, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, like, it's interesting to me to talk about that division because, like, I see it every day. We're the only white family on our street. So we live in a majority black neighborhood. Like I said, our neighborhood is in the Normandy School District. So, like, my kids are both the only white student in their class. Like, there are a couple white students in each grade level, but because they're divided, like, they're the only white kids in their class. And our district is very poor, and our neighborhood is very poor. So, there are, like, as a little tiny city within the county, there are a lot of efforts to try to bring in some revenue, but I think one of the one of the things, in addition to the visual aspects that you noted, like if you just drive through my neighborhood, like it's not that the properties aren't well maintained in the neighborhood where I live in, but like you can tell just looking at them that the property value is probably less than if you go down into Ladue where there are big houses that have big yards um but if you drive just 5 minutes east and cross the city line from the county into the city, there are a lot of abandoned properties. In fact, like we go to the Bear YMCA on Page, so it's just a 5-minute drive from our house, and we drive by like 3 houses along Page that are just crumbling. Like, clearly nobody's living in them, but like the properties haven't been maintained. So it's very evident, and the segregation, whether willful or not, which I mean I know you cover some of the history of it in your paper, is very apparent. Like, so these are like majority Black communities that have just a lack of tax dollars, a low property value. Most of the people I know living in my neighborhood don't own the homes that they're in, so they're renting instead of owning, which also goes to wealth disparity, right? Because when you own your home, that is an asset that you have, and you're building wealth, and you're building generational wealth. And it's such a stark contrast, and like it doesn't take a lot to see it.
Something that was interesting that you said about your kids,
Mm-hmm.
like me growing up, I was one of the only few Black students in my class. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's such a different parallel for me. As a resident, do you kind of notice some of the efforts that you're trying to make, or do you think they're just saying things that aren't really going anywhere, or have you like seen things being put in action?
So I would say yes. I've seen it more in Pagedale than in Veneta Park, and I think one of the things that Veneta Park has going, like a barrier that Veneta Park has to deal with, is that like it's so very tiny, and so like getting businesses to move in, like I think there was like a Jack in the Box technically within the Veneta Park like city bounds. I don't know that there's anything else. I mean, we've got the public library. I think there's a FedEx distribution center that I think is technically within like the bounds of the city. But so when you're looking at the fact that it's a primarily residential area where everybody rents, like there are a lot of questions for me as to like how can this community start building wealth. But I also see our mayor and our older people like working really hard with community organizers to bring in goods for the community. Like there's aside from community building efforts, there was so much assistance during COVID-19, like meal pickup at least once a week at the library, meal pickup at least once a week at the community next door. And a lot of those were cooperative with the mayors between the different communities in the Normandy School District. For Pagedale, there's actually a stretch of Page in Pagedale. Cori Bush has her office along it, where they've been trying to actually build up. I think they want to do what Cherokee Street is doing. I don't know if you're familiar with what Cherokee Street has been doing. It's a South City neighborhood in one of the more depressed areas of South City. And they've been working really hard to revitalize business along it. And so it's like 4 or 5 blocks, and there are a lot of businesses along there. Restaurants, markets, trying to think some of the other businesses. I took my kids trick-or-treating there. And And so I feel like the community organizations in that I'm familiar with in North County, like 24/1 and Beyond Housing, are the two that I've seen the most. They're trying to attract businesses there. So, like, we have a little cinema. I actually went to see Black Panther there on Sunday. Um, it's got like 2 or 3 screens. It's like, and they don't sit like a whole lot of people, but we've got a little cinema there, and there's like a couple restaurants and a community health center, um, and we had a Save a Lot like right across the street from it, but that went out of business last year. And when the Save a Lot went out of business, we actually got a lot of um, both emails and paper mail from Beyond Housing and 24/1 about about its closing and about the efforts that they were making to try to attract another supermarket, another grocery store there. So I'm seeing the effort, and I even like based on because we moved into the house we're in now in 2014, and so I would say that that area of Pagedale has definitely like attracted a lot more businesses since we moved in.
I'm gonna backtrack a little bit.
Yeah.
So when you're living in like the city,
Mm-hmm.
like I know now you're talking about how officials are trying to make efforts to like kind of revitalize and like bring in businesses to the county.
Yeah.
Do you think that's what like the neighborhoods you live
Mm-hmm.
in, or maybe drove past before or something?
Yeah.
Do you think those same efforts are being made within the city limits?
Yes, I do. The ones that I'm directly aware of is I know that there's some citizen organizers who are attempting to purchase blighted and vacant properties, but I know that there are some efforts to address all of those vacant properties because so Page is a street that runs parallel to Delmar. It's like cobble blocks, yeah. So there's like Olive is the next major street, and then Page. And so like sometimes I'll actually take Page into work. So I'll like get onto Page, drive straight through the county, and then North City over to like Grand. And so like right along that stretch, there are some businesses. There's like Rankin, which is a technical school. Lots and lots of the houses, like I said, that are vacant and like actually crumbling. Like I've watched one in the course of my time at SLU go from just clearly a vacant house to like the porch just sort of like collapse and fold in on itself. And so I know that one of the things that a lot of those residential communities in the city want is they want to get vacant properties away from the owners who are not living in them and not maintaining them, and fix them up and make programs so that those houses are affordable for people who want to live in them to actually live in them. And that I think that's one of the things I've seen that as more of a problem in the North City neighborhoods I've been in than in some of the North County neighborhoods I've been in. Not that I haven't seen vacant properties in North County, but I've seen more vacant residences in North City when I've been through it.
Do you think that the efforts that they're trying to make to, try to get rid of not get rid of the vacant properties, but like repurpose those vacant properties, do you think that would help with like trying to get rid of some of that disparity, or trying to like bring more people into the city so that they don't see the effects of like everyone fleeing the city and things like that?
I do think that it's an important step because one of the other things about those vacant properties is they're driving down property values for the people who are there living in their homes. So it's kind of like a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So by restoring those properties, making sure that they can actually be homes to people again, It raises the property value for everybody in the community, raises the tax revenue for the city. And also, it makes the neighborhoods more attractive for businesses like grocery stores and, restaurants. Um, so while I'm not an urban planner, like it seems like um, a really good first step for those neighborhoods. Now there may be some other issues going on there that I'm not familiar with, but that's one of the ones that I've seen myself and that I have seen community organizers talking about.
I just have like one final, very, very open-ended question
Okay.
for you. So, we talked about your experiences in St. Louis, within SLU, outside of SLU, and your residence as an undergrad student, as a professional. So you've kind of seen a lot of different changes that the city and the county has had.
Yeah.
Again, this is like very open-ended, but putting all those things together, do you think that do you have hope for St. Louis that it's going to try to rebuild rebuild itself through like its city limits, but also like maintaining the city and county as a whole? Like, do you have hope that strong force is going to keep itself together?
I do have hope. I am worried sometimes because I've also seen some political movements in the area that don't seem to care whether the city thrives, I think, would be one way to put it. But I see so many like grassroots level people in different neighborhoods in St. Louis who are willing to address all of the problems that we've talked about today, and I think the one thing that I don't yet see a clear path forward on, that I still have hope for, because I know that there are community organizers that are starting to address that, is how to address the really, like, the institutional and systemic way that communities are segregated by race. Like, we're so focused just on making sure that the city survives at this point that I think the type of really intense emotional work we need to do in order to break down the racial barriers that have been in St. Louis for a very long time. I think that we still got a lot of work ahead of us there. But I'm choosing to be hopeful about it because I see so many passionate people working to make those changes.
I'm glad that you're very hopeful about St. Louis. And for those who are listening, I will include links or information to some of those organizations that are trying to make efforts to help bring the city back together and, do a little focus on the city of St. Louis itself, and then, work its way out to the county. And again, thank you, Dr. Barton, for joining us today. And it was a very good pleasure to talk to you today. And I value everything that you said in this episode today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
In today's podcast with Dr. Barton, I was able to get the perspective of someone who has lived in different parts of St. Louis City and County, as well as a person who has been in St. Louis long enough to see some of the changes it has gone through. To wrap up today's podcast episode, I would just like to say how St. Louis City has a lot of work to do. Some of the practices from as early as the 1930s have prevailed through St. Louis and created physical separation and segregation among the city, its neighborhoods, and the county in St. Louis. And it is our job to find out what those issues are and to draw attention to them so that the city officials can work to revive this city.